My name is Albert D. Wang. I'm a fifth-year PhD candidate in accounting from UT Austin. I'm on the market this year, and I'll be joining the University of Iowa in the incoming summer. And I want to take a moment to quickly thank the organizers of this workshop. And it's a great honor to be here to share my research. And as you can see, the title of the paper is The Lemons Market for Disclosure Redactions. And this is based on my first year summer paper, and since then has become a joint work with Yong at UT Austin. So we're interested in disclosure redactions. So what is disclosure redaction? Let me give you an example. Here is a factory lease contract between Tesla and Panasonic. And as you can see, Section 2 of this contract is Tesla responsibilities, and Section 4 is representations and warranties. However, the whole section, Section 3, has been redacted. So we're interested in specifically whether one firm's redaction behavior actually affects another firm's redaction behavior. We're interested in this research question for two reasons. The first reason is that according to the redaction literature, there are two major motives of redaction. The first one is to protect their proprietary information. The second one is the managers, they actually want to redact information in the material contract so that they can hide usually bad news from the investors. But there is little research on the peer effects in redaction. So this is the first reason we want to study redaction. And the second reason is that there happens to be a perfect setting we think that is suitable to study peer effects. So this redaction process, aka confidential treatment requests, have been in place in the States for more than 20 years. The SEC issued the first guidance in 1997. But since then, every year there are about 1/3 of the firm will use this redaction process to protect their proprietary information. But in 2019, there is a FAST Act and also a Supreme Court ruling that significantly changed the process. But there is little research on the impact of this act on firms' redaction behavior. We think this act and the Supreme Court ruling is a good setting to study peer effects. Let me first explain why we think there is this peer effect. The reason we think there is this peer effect is because if you think about it, based on the literature, there are two types of firms in the market. The good type, they're the ones that are redacting their material contract because they want to protect their proprietary information. And there are the bad type. Those firms want to redact their material contracts so that they can conceal bad news. But as the investors, we cannot distinguish which is which. All we can do is price protect ourselves. So we're going to discount all redacting firms. In the equilibrium, the good firms are going to be pooled with the bad firms. It is because compared to release your proprietary information, it is still better to just take the discount from the market if you're a good firm. And for a bad firm, compared to just to disclose your bad news to your investors, it is still better than just it is still better to just redact the information and take the discount from the market. So there is this pooling equilibrium. We think there is this peer effect because if you think about it, if the proportion of bad firms in the market increases a lot and investors perceive that, then what they're going to do is they're going to discount even more, which means the cost of redaction is going to be larger from the market. So for the good firms, if they have some like marginal proprietary information, now redacting those information become more costly because investors cannot distinguish which is which means it will force the good firms to stop redacting, to start to disclose those marginal proprietary information. This is where this lemons problem arises. And the 2019 FAST Act is actually a good setting to study this lemons problem because before the FAST Act, the requirement of redaction is that you need to justify that your information that you're going to redact is immaterial to investors, and you need to also justify if disclosed, it will cause competitive harm. which means in your confidential treatment request filed with the SEC, you need to attach the redacted version of your contract, unredacted version of your contract, all the documents to justify the immateriality and the competitive harm. But what happened in 2019 is that the FAST Act actually removed this CTR process. You no longer need to seek approval from the SEC. You can just redact whatever you want. And SEC said, we're going to check on your redaction when we check you on your annual reports. So based on a random basis. And also the Supreme Court ruling happened in 2019 also replaced the definition or updates the definition of proprietary information. The proprietary information definition was immaterial to investors, would cause competitive harm, but now as long as the information being customarily kept private or at least closely held, then it will be considered as proprietary information. So based on the lemons problem, lemons market story, we have these two hypotheses. The first hypothesis is that the bad firms, they're going to actually increase their redaction rates because of this deregulation, because of the reduced oversight from the SEC. And for the good firms, they're the ones actually going to experience this peer effect. So we predict that they're going to decrease their redaction rates. I want to highlight two characteristics of our hypothesis. The first one is that we're predicting the act having opposing effects on different types of firms, which means if there is any confounding variables or factors, they need to also have this opposing effect, which is less likely. And the second characteristic of our hypothesis is that I want to highlight the tension of the second hypothesis. Although the good firms are the ones that are going to experience this peer effect, but they also face the incentive to increase their redaction rate because now redaction is easier. Nobody is checking on your redaction. So they may use it to redact bad news as well. They may use it to redact the material proprietary information that cannot be redacted before. So the way we're going to construct the sample is that we scrape all material contracts in 10Ks, 10Qs, and 8Ks around these two events, the FAST Act, which happened in 2019, April 2019, and the Supreme Court ruling happened in June 2019. And we scraped all the material contracts in the 4 rolling window years in the pre-period and in 4 rolling window years in the post-period. We require all firms to have material contracts in both pre and post FAST Act period because we want to do this pre-post comparison. And we also require all firms to have at least one material contract so that we can calculate the redaction rate at the firm year level. So to test our hypothesis, we need to empirically identify what is a good firm or what is a bad firm. If you think about it, by definition, whether a firm is a good or bad firm in our theory is basically depends on whether their redaction behavior is dominated by proprietary or by agency costs relative to their peers. If a firm's behavior is dominated by agency cost, then after FAST Act, after this deregulation, you should see the increase in their redaction rate. If a firm's behavior is dominated by proprietary cost, then those are the firms that are going to experience this peer effect the most. So you may observe the decrease in redaction rate in those firms. And we know that in the pre-period, all those redactions actually were scrutinized by the SEC, which means SEC already verified the proprietary information in those pre-FAST Act redactions. So we're going to use these information to classify the firms in our sample into 3 groups. The first group is the low proprietary ones. They are the ones having significantly lower redaction rates in the pre-period than their rivals, which means they probably don't have proprietary information. Otherwise, they will file confidential treatment requests and SEC will approve that, right? So for those firms, if there is anything bad happen in the post period, those are the firm are more likely to just use redaction to hide those bad news. And the second group of firms is high proprietary ones. Those are the firms are having significantly higher pre-act redaction rate than their rivals. So they are verified by the SEC, and they are driven by their proprietary motives in terms of their redaction behavior, which means in the post period, they are going to be the one experiencing this peer effect the most. And we're going to comparing them to both the benchmark group. The benchmark group is a group that having redaction rate in the pre-period similar to their rivals. We don't have a prior for them. How they're going to behave, we don't know. So we use them as a benchmark because we don't see a clear domination of which cost is going to dominate their redaction behavior. And in terms of the definition of rivals or competitors, we're going to use this TNIC definition developed by these two papers. So empirically, let me show you how I calculate or how I classify a firm into three groups. First, I calculate the redaction rate in the pre-period for the focal firm, and I subtract the peer firm's redaction rate from the focal firm and get the redaction spillover. If the firm has a very low redaction spillover, I'm going to, if it's in like the bottom 3 decile, I'm going to classify them as a low proprietary firm. As you can see, those low proprietary firm has very low redaction rate in the pre-period. They only redact 2.3% of their contract, and their peers, while their peers redact 12 or 13% of their contract. And similarly, we're going to classify the firms with these redaction spillover in the top 3 decile as high proprietary group. Those are the firms, their redaction rate is very high relative to their peers. And benchmark group, their redaction rate in the pre-period is very comparable to their peers. And based on our theory, we should observe the opposing effect on different groups of firms. For the low proprietary group, as expected, they increase their redaction rate because of the deregulation. And for the benchmark group, as I said, we don't have a prior for them. We also see an increase in redaction rate, but obviously this increase is not as much as a low proprietary group. And for the high proprietary group, as expected, they are the one experiencing the most peer effects, and we see a decrease in their redaction rate. So to formally test this hypothesis, we need to use difference in difference analysis. We're basically comparing low proprietary group with benchmark and comparing high proprietary group with benchmark after controlling for all firm characteristics. So this is a model specification. Beta 1 is going to capture the deregulation effect on the low proprietary group. We should see a positive beta 1. Beta 2 is a coefficient that is going to capture the peer effects. For the high proprietary group, we should see, based on the hypothesis, a negative beta 2. And what we're going to control here in this X is first, we're going to control all firm characteristics, but we're also going to control for proprietary agency cost or all other costs that is going to drive this redaction rate of the focal firm. And what is more important is that we actually also control for the control dash post interactions. Because if you think about it, fast act could affect the redaction rate by changing the effect of proprietary cost on redaction, by changing the effect of agency cost on redaction. In other words, fast act could behave as a moderator on those channels. And we also include firm and year fixed effect in this regression. And this is our hypothesis. And as expected, in all model specifications, when we don't have control or control dash post in the model, or when we add one of those where when we add all of those, the results are very robust, and we see an increase in redaction for low proprietary group and decreasing redaction for high proprietary group. We also check the parallel trend. As you can see, the effect happened not before, but after this FAST Act has been implemented. So you may think, well, what about this mean reversion of contract behavior? Because what we're documenting here is basically saying, well, the firms with very high redaction rate in the pre-period are going to decrease their redaction rate in the post period. And we're documenting that the low proprietary group is basically the one with very low redaction rate to begin with, and they increase their redaction rate afterwards. So you may wonder, maybe this is just because of the mean reversion of contracting behavior. Maybe contracts arrive irregularly in time, and the number of contracts just to revert to a mean level. Therefore, firms receiving more proprietary contract in the pre-period, they just will receive fewer in the post-period because of the mean reversion of the contracting behavior, which means our findings are mechanical. But I want to argue that this is probably not the case, or not the main driver of our results, because if you think about mean reversion, it does not come from nowhere. It should be driven by some motive, some factors. So the first thing we did in our paper is that we expand our control variables, the list of control variables, and we add all those control variables in the regression, trying to control for whatever is driving this mean reversion, and we still see the same results. And the second thing I want to argue is that if there is this mean reversion of contracting behavior, this fluctuation should be smoothed by our group definition, because our group indicators are based on 4-year behavior in the pre-period. So any like those contracted fluctuations should be smoothed out. But nevertheless, we conduct a battery of analysis to try to directly address this concern. The first analysis is very simple. We just calculated the mean reversion year by year. So there are two types of mean reversion, right? The one reversing from non-redacting to redacting. So every year there is a percent of firm switching from non-redacting to redacting. And every year there is a certain percentage of firm switching from redacting in last year to non-redacting this year. So we calculate the rate of those mean reversion. And as you can see, there is a very obvious structural change or break around the year of FAST Act. So this is the first piece of evidence. And the second piece of evidence is that we directly control for lagged focal or peer redaction rates in the model specification. And we also control for the lagged redaction rate dash post. So all those interactions, and the results stay the same. And we also have other supporting evidence in cross-sectional analysis, in strategic reaction analysis, which is consistent with our story, but not consistent with the mean reversion story. So let me show you first the cross-sectional analysis results. So in the cross-sectional analysis, we're trying to figure out what is driving this low proprietary firms increasing their redaction. So we look at the ones with more bad news, because based on the theory, those are the low proprietary firms increase their redaction because of the deregulation, because they want to take advantage of the deregulation to hide bad news. So as you can see, the firms within the low proprietor firm group with more bad news, proxied by this residual short interest, are actually going to increase their redaction even more. So this is a first piece of evidence. And the second piece of evidence is that if you think about what can deter the low proprietor firm to increase their redaction, is that litigation risk could be one thing. So we looked at high litigation risk group of firms within the low proprietor firms. those firms actually has a lower increase in their redaction rate, which is consistent with our theory, with our hypothesis that low proprietor firms increase their redactions because they want to hide bad news. And when facing this higher litigation risk, they're actually going to increase just a slightly less. And we also look at the high proprietary group of firms. Within high proprietary group of firms, why they decrease their redaction. If the theory is correct, we should observe the high proprietary firms that has the most that is most sensitive to the market to decrease their redaction the most. So we observe that among the high proprietary firms, the one with a high equity issuance are the ones actually going to decrease even more of their redaction because they want the investors to know their type. They don't want to pool with the bad ones. And if a firm has more institutional holdings, that is actually going to help this situation for the high proprietary group because they have this private channel to communicate with institutional institutional investors. So they are less concerned about this peer effect, about this pooling with bad firms. And we also directly look at the change in redaction or the change in redaction behavior of the focal firm. And we notice that only the high proprietary firms are reacting to their peers relative to the benchmark group. So lastly, in this paper, we look at the consequences of this new regulation or of this peer effects. We look at the financial performance and observe that both group of firms experience slower sales growth. So this is very intuitive because for the low proprietor firms, it is easier for them now to hide information from investors. So it's going to affect their performance. And for the high proprietary group firms, they are the ones forced to disclose their proprietary information or marginal proprietary information. So they're also going to experience slower sales growth. And we also did a lot of additional analysis and robustness checks in this paper. We did a disclosure consequences analysis, and we did a random group assignment as a plausible test. And we also test other alternative dependent variables. For example, instead of calculating the firm year level redaction rate, we just count how many redactions happened in 1 year. And we also just use a dummy variable to denote whether a firm has redacted anything in a year. So those alternative dependent variables does not change the results. And we also changed the independent variables, test a different definition of independent variables by playing with the weighting of those peer redaction rate. And we also changed the peer definition and the results stay the same. In terms of sample construction, we have extra control variables. We also looked at a subsample with more than 5 contracts in a firm year because it will help us to get a more accurate redaction rate. We also changed the fixed effects to industry fixed effect, industry-year fixed effect, and observe the same results. We also tested different clustering methods. The results stay the same. So to conclude, in this paper, we find that FAST Act largely reduces regulatory oversight on redactions. And second, we find that agency-driven firms opportunistically redact bad news, increasing their redaction rates. And in response to the influx, proprietary-driven firms actually are forced to give up proprietary information. We think we made 3 contributions in this paper. The first one is we identify a new motive for disclosure redaction, that is a peer redaction effects. And the second contribution is that we identify a new mechanism for peer disclosure, which is agency redaction can actually crowd out proprietary redaction. And lastly, we think our paper has regulatory implication because the FAST Act and the Supreme Court ruling were supposed to help firms to better protect their proprietary information. But actually, we show that it worked the exact opposite way. It actually make it worse, make it even more difficult for the good firms to protect their proprietary information. So that's pretty much of my presentation. I look forward to the discussion. Thank you.